I attended Berklee College of Music where I received my undergraduate degree in jazz composition. And you might be or might not be aware of this, but a lot of the study of harmony at Berklee College of Music hinges on what we call chord scales. Chord scale theory is essentially a method by which we can determine what the most correct scale is to use in any given harmonic situation. Today, I'd like to talk about chord scales, in what ways they're important, in what ways they fall short, a method we can use to build our own chord scales, and also discuss different ways we can use them in our practice. Let's get into it. So, let's go into a little bit more depth in describing what a chord scale is. As I said previously, a chord scale is the most correct scale to use over any given chord in a chord progression. The chord scale can be impacted by a couple of different factors. One, the quality of the chord itself. Two, the relationship of that chord to the underlying key center of the song or of the moment. And three, any prominent melody notes on top of that chord. I want to be clear when I say the most correct scale, I mean the most ubiquitous note choices that are going to sound the most familiar for most listeners. So, with that said, what are chord scales good for? Well, firstly, they're important for sounding correct. If you want to play an improvisation where all of your note choices make good melodic sense and are easily digestible by an average listener, then using chord scales is a solid choice. Secondly, by understanding chord scales, we get to have a better understanding of the relationship between melody, harmony, and key center. By understanding these relationships more, we can then learn to make more informed harmonic choices, so that when we do derivate from our usual chord scales, we make those choices with an understanding of how we're changing things. Let's discuss the steps we're going to take in order to build our chord scales. Let's assume we're looking at a jazz standard we've never seen before. The first thing we're going to want to do is determine the function of each chord in our song. So for each chord, ask yourself, is this a 1 chord? Is this a 4 chord? Or is it a borrowed chord, like this 5 of 6 chord, leading us into our next 6 chord? The answer to this question is going to be important as it helps us to make decisions down the line. Now that we know the functions for each of our chords, we can start building chord scales for each of them. We're going to start with just the notes of the chord itself. So take our E flat major 7 chord. We have E flat, G, B flat, and D. Our chord tones are non-negotiable in our final scale choice. In between each of those chord tones, we're going to put in a passing tone belonging to our key. So in between those chord tones, we're going to have F, A flat, and C. And you'll notice what we end up with is our E flat major scale. Well, let's take our next chord, the 4 chord A flat major 7. A flat, C, E flat, G. Well, now, in between each of those chord tones, again, we're going to put in notes belonging to our home key. So in between A flat and C, we'll have B flat, next passing tone is D, and then F. What we have here is an A flat Lydian scale, which is an E flat major scale, but starting on the note A flat. So where things can get a little bit more interesting is when we're using chords that we're borrowing from another key center. So take our next chord, the G7. This is our 5/7 of 6. So because of that, when we're building our scale, we start with our chord tones as usual, but when we're filling in our passing tones, we're actually going to use notes belonging to our borrowed key center of C minor. What you might notice is that we've ended up here with a C harmonic minor scale starting on G. Now that we've built a chord scale for each of these chords, we can determine the parent scale and mode name for each of them. So our E flat major chord, we used E flat major as our parent scale, and this is E flat Ionian. For our A flat major 7 chord, we again used an E flat major scale, but starting on A flat, so this is an A flat Lydian scale. For our G7, this is a C harmonic minor parent scale, and we call this mode G Mixolydian flat 9, flat 13. A little bit of a mouthful. And then our 6th chord, the C minor, this is again E flat major is our parent scale, but this is a C Aeolian mode. By the way, if you want to learn more about the modes of your major, harmonic, and melodic minor scales, I have a resource available on my website. Also on my website, you can find all of my other jazz education resources from my other YouTube videos, as well as a contact form if you're interested in private lessons. Thanks. So to get a little bit more real-world application of these chord scales, let's look how this system applies to the chord progression to There Will Never Be Another You. So first, let's look at the chord progression itself and analyze our chords. So we have our 1 chord, E flat major, then we have a 7 minor 7 flat 5 going to our 5-7 of 6, which we could also think of as a minor 2-5 leading to our 6 C minor. After that, we have a 5 minor 7, which really is a 2 in our 2-5, leading to our 4 chord. This leads to a flat 7-7, in turn to a 1 chord again, 6 chord, then a 2 dominant chord to a 2-5-1. So now we can again begin to build our scales for each of these chords. So for our E flat major 7, we have our E flat Ionian scale, D minor 7 flat 5, our D Locrian scale, to G7, which is our C harmonic minor starting on G, which is G Mixolydian flat 9 flat 13, C Aeolian, to B flat Dorian, E flat Mixolydian, A flat Ionian. You might be asking yourself, well, it's a 4 chord, why are you using Ionian instead of Lydian? Well, because we had that 2-5 leading to the 4 chord, it's kind of normalized that natural 4 on that 4 chord. And then we have our flat 7-7. This is parent scale is A flat melodic minor, or what we call this mode D flat Lydian flat 7. Then we're back to our 1 chord, again Ionian, Aeolian, and we have our 2 dominant chord. So we have a 2 Mixolydian chord, and then 2 Dorian, 5 Mixolydian, 1. While we're looking at the chord scales to this song, I'd like to mention some of the shortfallings that I personally see in chord scale theory. One is that it misses many of the common practice alterations that many great improvisers will use over these kind of songs. So for instance, in the 13th measure of that F7, the 2 dominant chord, most great improvisers over a 2 dominant chord, I shouldn't say most, but many great improvisers over a 2 dominant chord will use a Lydian flat 7 choice in order to get that sharp 11 sound over that chord. But our chord scale theory tells us to just use a plain Mixolydian scale choice, which works perfectly fine, but it's not necessarily the common practice among jazz improvisers. Secondly, it misses using alterations over 5 chords. So in pretty much any 2-5-1 situation, I'd say most improvisers will put some kind of alteration on their 5 chord in order to add a dimension of drama and tension and resolution as they resolve to their 1 chord. Thirdly, chord scales miss on chromatic passing tones, which can be a really important element of bebop improvisation. So there's no enclosures or bebop notes present in these scales. Going back to the metaphor of jazz improvisation as a language, when we're learning a new language, we often find ourselves learning rules of conjugation and grammar that, as we get deeper into that language, we realize are quickly broken. So what I hope you do with these chord scales is use them as a baseline for your harmonic decision making, that you can use them to make more educated harmonic choices and not feel boxed in by them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it's helped you to understand a little bit better about what chord scales are and how we can use them as improvisers. If you're interested in any of the materials from this video, they are available on my website. Also on my website, you can find an inquiry form if you're interested in private lessons, as well as all of my materials from my previous videos on jazz improvisation. Thank you so much, and happy practicing.